In the operating room, there are these moments, these scenarios that are incredibly rare, but they're so critical, they can define an entire career. Malignant hyperthermia is one of them. It's a high-stakes, life-or-death emergency that demands you recognize it instantly and act flawlessly. So let's dive into this exact scenario and break down everything you need to know when every single second counts.
So just picture it. You've got an otherwise healthy patient, they're in for a standard procedure, anesthesia induction is smooth, no issues at all. Vitals are looking great, the surgeon makes the first cut, everything is going, exactly by the book.
And then, suddenly, the monitors start telling a completely different story. A subtle change at first, and then another. And this is that crucial moment where being vigilant can turn a potential catastrophe into a crisis you can actually manage.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this whole thing, we're going to walk through it step by step. We'll kick off with those very first signs of a crisis. Then we'll define what this condition actually is. We'll explore what's going haywire at a cellular level, learn how to spot it, go through the emergency protocol, and then wrap up with what happens after and how to prevent it.
All right, so let's jump right back into that OR. The first clues that something is terribly wrong are often really subtle. They can be so easy to miss if you're not actively looking for them. This is where a sharp eye is just absolutely critical.
So let's focus on that first point, because it's huge. Often, the earliest and most specific sign is this weird, unexplained spike in the patient's end-tidal carbon dioxide. So you do what you're trained to do. You increase their breathing rate, you increase ventilation, but the CO2 just keeps climbing. I mean, that is a massive red flag. Right after that, you might see their heart rate just take off. That's the tachycardia. And then a really classic sign, though it's not always there, is the patient's jaw muscle clamping down, becoming rigid.
So, what is this terrifying thing that's just hijacked a perfectly routine surgery? It's time to pull back the curtain and talk about what this condition actually is, malignant hyperthermia, or MH for short.
At its very core, MH is a genetic disorder that affects the skeletal muscles, and it's inherited in an autosomal dominant way. What that means is you only need one copy of the faulty gene from just one parent to be susceptible. The thing is, it lies totally dormant, completely silent, until that person is exposed to very specific triggers. We're talking about certain anesthetic gases or a muscle relaxant called succinylcholine. And when that happens, boom, it unleashes this runaway hypermetabolic firestorm inside the body.
So the main bad guy here, genetically speaking, is usually a mutation in a gene called RYR1. And this is why doing a really thorough pre-op history it's non-negotiable. You have to ask about any personal or family history of problems with anesthesia. So if a patient ever says something like, "Oh yeah, my uncle died during surgery," whoa, you have to stop everything, investigate that immediately, and totally change your anesthetic plan. It's that big of a deal.
Now, to really truly get what's happening in an MH crisis, we've got to zoom in. I'm talking way, way in, down to the level of a single muscle cell, because that's where this genetic flaw causes a total and catastrophic failure of how things are supposed to work.
Okay, so inside every single one of your muscle cells, there's this little storage tank for calcium. It's called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and the gate on this tank is the ryandine receptor, or RYR1. Well, in people with MH, a mutation makes that gate faulty and unstable. The best way to think about it is like a broken dam. It's holding back all this calcium, but it's just waiting for the wrong signal to totally burst open.
So here's how that cascade of events unfolds. The anesthetic trigger hits that faulty RYR1 gate. Well, it just flies open, and that releases this massive, uncontrolled flood of calcium into the cell. All that extra calcium forces the muscle into this rigid, sustained contraction. And to fuel that contraction, the cell's metabolism kicks into insane overdrive, just churning out massive amounts of CO2, acid, and a ton of heat. Eventually, the cell can't take it anymore, and it just breaks down, releasing everything inside, like potassium, into the bloodstream. You can see how this is just a vicious cycle, right? It spirals out of control incredibly fast.
Okay, so let's pull back from the cellular level and get back to the bedside. We need to see how this cellular disaster actually shows up as signs and symptoms in our patient, because recognizing the complete pattern is the key to confidently diagnosing this in the middle of all that chaos.
Okay, this is so important. This comparison right here, this is your window of opportunity. Those early signs, the rising CO2, the rigidity, the tachycardia, that's your shot to jump in and do something. If you miss that window, you're slammed with the late signs, and they are devastating. We're talking skyrocketing body temperature, severe muscle breakdown, that's rhabdolysis, which, and this is a classic sign, turns the urine dark, literally the color of cola. And then the body's entire clotting system can just fall apart. Time is everything here.
So, while all this is happening, while you're acting on these signs, you've got to be yelling for stat labs to back you up and guide what you do next. An arterial blood gas is going to show a crazy acidosis with high CO2. Your electrolytes will show dangerously high potassium levels from all that muscle breakdown, which you can confirm with a massively high creatine kinase, or CK, level.
Okay, you've spotted it. You've recognized the crisis. From this moment on, it is a flat-out race against the clock. The only way to save this patient is with a coordinated, systematic response. Every single second matters.
The very first things you do are immediate. They are absolute, no hesitation. First, stop the cause. Turn off those volatile gases and stop the succinylcholine immediately. Second, you call for help, and you call loudly. Announce that you have an MH crisis and get that dedicated MH cart to your room now. At the same time, you've got to start hyperventilating the patient with 100% oxygen to try and blow off all that extra CO2. And finally, you tell the surgeon to stop. The surgery is over. And hey, just a quick note for teams in the US and Canada. Don't forget about the MHA US hotline. It's an absolutely critical resource to have in your back pocket.
And now, we meet the hero of the story, dantrolene. This is the one and only specific antidote for malignant hyperthermia. So, how does this miracle drug actually work? Well, it goes right to the source of the problem, that leaky RYR1 calcium channel. Dantrolene basically plugs the leak, stopping the flood of calcium and giving the cell a chance to start recovering.
You've got to get this stuff in, and you've got to get it in fast. The initial dose is a rapid IV push, about 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram, and you just keep repeating it until the symptoms start getting better. Now, one of the old challenges was that the original formula took forever to mix. Thankfully, there's a newer formulation called RyanX that you can get ready in less than a minute. And believe me, in a crisis like this, that is an absolute game changer.
See, while the dantrolene is doing its job, you can't just stand there. You have to go on the attack and manage all the other chaos that's happening. That means actively cooling the patient with everything you've got: cold IV fluids, ice packs, cooling blankets. You've got to treat that life-threatening high potassium with insulin and glucose, fix the severe acidosis with bicarbonate, and just flood them with IV fluids to protect their kidneys from getting clogged up and failing.
This right here, this table, is something that every single anesthesia provider has to have burned into their brain. The second a crisis is called, or if you find out ahead of time that a patient is susceptible to MH, you must switch to a totally safe anesthetic plan. That means no volatile gases, no succinylcholine. Instead, you'll use a total intravenous anesthetic with stuff like propofol, opioids, and anything else from that safe column.
Okay, so let's say you've done it. You've navigated the crisis, the patient is stabilized. But surviving MH, that's really just the beginning. The aftermath requires a ton of intensive care, and the information you gained is absolutely vital for protecting not just the patient, but their entire family down the road. First things first, that patient is going straight to the ICU for at least 24 hours. And you might ask why. Well, it's because MH can actually come back. It's a thing called recrudescence. We've got to keep a close eye out for kidney failure and also for massive muscle swelling that can cut off circulation, which is a dangerous condition called compartment syndrome. And maybe most importantly, we educate the patient and we counsel their family. Because this is genetic, their parents, their siblings, their kids, they're all at risk and they need to be checked out.
So, after everything has calmed down, how do you actually confirm for sure that someone is susceptible to MH? Well, the gold standard is a really specialized test called the caffeine halothane contracture test. It's pretty wild. They actually take a tiny piece of your muscle, a biopsy, and in a lab, they expose it to caffeine and halothane to see if it contracts abnormally. Genetic testing for those known mutations is also a super important tool for confirming it.
Look, malignant hyperthermia is rare. We're talking maybe 1 in 250,000 anesthetics. But back in the day, the mortality rate was nearly 80%. Today, with modern treatment, it's less than 5%. The only thing that stands between those two numbers, 80% and 5%, is knowledge, its vigilance, and its preparation. So I guess the final question to leave you with is, are you and is your team truly prepared for this nightmare scenario?